The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
Eating a clean peach over the kitchen sink, Southern Ambrosia. 910 to 9295. Ain't it just like I told ya? Floor fan humming, old dog leg drumming to the rhythm of her dreams. Cigarette lip dangling, nerves all tangled.
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 75, and our guest is Kristina Murray. What a thrill, y'all. Kristina is a singer and songwriter from Georgia who now makes her home in Nashville. Y'all, do yourself a favor and spend some time with Kristina's music. Her record, Southern Ambrosia, is her most recent full length, and it is just wonderful. We talk about that gorgeous work of art and so much more during this conversation. Kristina is thoughtful, intelligent, interesting, all the things you want from a guest, and I'm so thankful to bring this conversation to you. Everyone, it is my honor to present my conversation with Kristina Murray.
There ain't no sweet don't ring and bring nobody down, but it seems the only thing I've found. 'Cause ain't a damn thing that really changed. I don't let it get too heavy, all these hard times that we carry. 'Cause I can still sing. I can still sing.
I can't hear you, but I can.
There we go.
There we are.
Who would have thought? I've done enough of these to know that I'm supposed to do that when I get in, but
Well, I do this all the time, and it doesn't matter. I'm gonna mess something up. You know, like, thankfully Zoom records everything, so I can't fuck up the recording, which is like 80% of my anxiety every time I do an interview. And so Zoom just takes the wheel. Zoom, take the wheel. I got you.
Friend.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. I am so
Yeah.
excited to talk with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to participate.
My first question I've been asking, and I'm really interested in this from you, is like, since March, pretty much every interview I've just been like, how are you? So like, how are you
I think-
doing?
Yeah, I think that's a great, question to start with, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such a roller coaster that one, day I'll be fine and then the next day I'll be awful. So today I feel pretty good. I think, I'm getting ready to go home to Atlanta for a few days. So I think just the anticipation of seeing my family is exciting, but also terrifying. So today it feels exciting, but probably tomorrow I'll have a total freak out about it. But it's been the Corona coaster, just I think for everyone, and I'm included in that.
Well, going home is a good place to kind of start as well, because I want to talk about place a little bit.
Yeah.
Southern Ambrosia, first of all, brilliant. I told you that personally, but I want to go on record just saying how much I love it.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Just really, really wonderful record. And I've had the great pleasure of listening to it about 100 times over the last 3 days as I get ready for this, which has been super fun.
Streams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you should probably get a check for like 85 cents or something just
Yeah.
for me coming up soon. So you're welcome. Um, but uh, but I am curious about place with you because you talk a lot about place on the record, and you grow up in Georgia, go to college, if I remember correctly, in South Carolina, end up in Colorado, end up in Nashville. And so those decision points about moving and how those affect your creative life, I'm curious about. So like when you make those decisions, are they creatively driven? Are they personally driven? Like, how do you decide in those moments in your life where you're going to be in the world?
Yeah, wow, that's a really great and involved question. I think when I decided to make the move to Colorado, it was both academically driven because I needed to do an internship to finish my degree at Clemson. So I needed to do an internship. And I had really had this longing to get out of the South for a period of time. You know, I was born and raised in Atlanta, and then I pretty much only ever traveled in and around the South Carolina and Florida, you know, maybe North Carolina, and then went to school, you know, in South Carolina. And I was 20, you know, 19, 20. And I was really like, I think it would be really healthy and good for me to get out of this region that I've been in and grown up in. And so that was a big motivating factor in moving to Colorado. It was also another, you know, big impetus for that, as well as I was really getting into bluegrass music at the time. And right about that time, like mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s, there's a really big burgeoning young person bluegrass scene on the Front Range in Colorado. So it was kind of equal parts driven by the desire to get out of the South, the need to complete an internship. My degrees in Parks and Recreation. Colorado was a great place to do that. And then also, you know, a third part by wanting to play music more. And that was a really great place to do that. So certainly the move there was kind of equal parts, all those things. And then, you know, moving back to Nashville, I would say would be almost 100% creatively motivated. My whole family still lives in the South. So I think there was a big part of that being closer to home, being closer to family. And then also the desire to just be back in the region of the country that really, you know, was my roots, you know, getting home to things like there's sweet tea in restaurants and there's trees, you know, there's a lot of things like there's not a lot of there's rain, you know, thunderstorms and stuff. And there's a lot of things that I didn't realize I would miss when I lived out West. And then, you know, when it was time to come home, it was time to come home. So, and then also obviously moving to Nashville was just wanting to be a part of a broader music scene. Yeah.
Can you say more about that though? Because I think, you know, that I think a lot of musicians, especially country or folk or, you know, Americana rooted kind of musicians, struggle with that question sometimes of like, do you go to Nashville or do you continue to do your thing somewhere else?
Yeah.
What, like, was that at all a difficult decision, or did that just seem like the natural progression for you, you know, in your career?
Yeah, I think it was a natural progression. When I got tired of living in Colorado, I got real sick of it really fast. You know, it might have had something to do with the fact that it snowed on Mother's Day the last year I lived there, and I was like, it's May, it's time to get the fuck out of here. But yeah, I think also it was just I felt like I had hit a ceiling with what I could accomplish there, as far as like, you know, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm knocking the scene there, because I do think it does have a role to play, obviously, in my history, but also there's a lot of great music that comes out of Colorado for sure. But it was so, for me, where I was, it was so bar band and covers driven mostly. It was really hard to get shows that kind of exposed or showcased a songwriter, which is what I eventually wanted, the direction I wanted to move in. It was more just like, man, you got to play 4 hours worth of classic country. And again, like, I'm so glad that I learned how to do that by living out there. But I think, you know, when I got to that ceiling of like, okay, I'm hosting an open mic night, I'm playing kind of the same route of bars that I've normally been doing. This really feels like I'm hitting the ceiling for what I want to accomplish creatively. And I also wanted to be part of more of a younger singer-songwriter scene of country artists and Americana artists. And that it was and is happening in Colorado, but I think just the kind of country and Americana music I wanted to make was just pulling me a lot towards Nashville. And there was already like a small cluster of that already kind of brewing and coming up. And when I moved here about 6 years ago. And so I was really drawn to that. But there was a period where it was like, okay, or am I going to move to Nashville, or am I going to move to Austin? So it was kind of like, you know, a very strong pull of the two places. And Nashville won out because Texas is really hot. Austin is really expensive. So.
Do I move to this coolest city in America or this other coolest city in America?
Exactly.
No, it's true.
I never had the New York City pull. I never wanted to live in New York. And I love California, but it's like a whole damn different country out there, man. It's wild, and it's really far away. But yeah, it's also really expensive. So it was kind of just like a natural fit to come to Nashville. I mean, it's the home, you know, it's the home of country music. And I'm so in love with country music and obsessed with country music. So to live in the city that exists because of country music, I think was really special to me, is really special to me.
So if and I agree with you about California. Like, I'll never forget the first time I drove into California from Nevada, and it was like, there's like a border check. I mean, it's an agricultural check or whatever. Like, they're making sure you're not bringing produce in. Right. But seriously, you have to stop at the border. It feels like traveling through Europe in the 90s or something. It's so wild. Like, the rest of the country, you just pass by, and next thing you know, you're in a different state. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
The country music, I find it interesting that you sort of, you ended up getting this education, so to speak, in playing country music in Colorado. Whereas, but if I understand correctly, most of the stuff that was playing at in your house growing up, like, you had a musical education growing up, but it was mostly like more rock and roll. Is that correct? So can you talk a little bit about that, like growing up on rock and roll and then getting really into country music? Because I feel like that comes into play in your records.
Yeah. I mean, certainly. I mean, my parents are, you know, children of the 60s. Like, they were hippie throwbacks, and it was always like Allman Brothers and the band and Bob Dylan, lots of Bob Dylan. I mean, growing up in my house, lots of Zeppelin. I mean, lots of blues music. So that was always on in my house. Like, my mom cooking, my dad hanging out on the back porch, like smoking cigarettes and reading and listening to, you know, Blonde on Blonde or whatever it is. And so there was that whole piece of growing up with this. And then on the side, my mom also had CDs like Jesse Coulter and Emmylou, like Luxury Liner, and of course a bunch of Joni Mitchell. So there was an aspect of like the folk and country in there a little bit, but it wasn't like the hard stuff really. I mean, other than like a Patsy Cline greatest hits record that we had. Other than that, it wasn't really a lot of country music. But right at about like 4th or 5th grade, I started going to sleepaway camp, the summer camp. And that was in the North Georgia mountains. And that's where I met like lots of different kinds of other people, you know, that I maybe didn't really experience growing up, going to public school in Atlanta. And that's where I kind of first heard Terry Clark and Tim McGraw and the Dixie Chicks. And so when, you know, mainstream country radio was was good, you know, with those acts. I thought it was great, you know, Trisha Yearwood, all that stuff. I started listening to that, you know, right when I was starting to get into middle school, which I think is, I don't know, I think right at about middle school, you kind of start to develop your own musical identity. That's when I started, you know, getting more serious about playing. I played the violin starting in first grade, but I started to get more serious about music in middle school. And I think having those country commercial, you know, radio country influences. I mean, I think I made up a dance to something like that by Tim McGraw. I had like Barbecue Stain, you know, kind of little dance. And anyway, so those kind of all mixed together. And then right in, you know, when I started playing guitar in high school is when I started to really get into folk, kind of more folk music, because I think it's easier to play, you know, other than just like power chords for rock and roll. And yeah, so I got into that, and then I don't know. My answer is kind of winding now. I forgot what I was going to say.
What I was curious about was like the intersection of that, and like how rock and roll and how growing up on sort of classic rock, so to speak, 60s and 70s rock, and then later getting into country music, and then really kind of like honing your chops later in life in Colorado playing that country music, like how that influences your creative process now. Those kind of the convergence of those things, I guess, is what I'm curious about.
Yeah, I wonder too if it's not so much genre specific, if it's just the kind of songs that I like and relate to. So when I think about what music and what songs really move me, you know, it's very melody driven, lyric, strong lyricism. And it's hard to say this without sounding like a music snob, because I've definitely been accused of being a music snob by my non-musician friends. I always basically think that all of my musician friends are also music snobs. And I think that's pretty accurate, you know?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
My non-musician friends, you know, have accused me of being kind of a music snob, but at some point it's kind of like, well, this is something that I give a lot of my time to and have given a lot of my time to and study. So of course I'm going to be more drawn to these kinds of music that are stronger and perhaps melody and song structure and lyricism and kind of the marriage of all those things, as opposed to pop music. And now I'm not knocking pop music or saying it doesn't have a place in the musical river of, you know, of life, but it's just not something I'm drawn to, I think, because that's a little bit more like beat or hook driven, I suppose, than something, you know, that I would be more drawn to.
Can we unpack that a little bit? Because I'm curious about, like, I read something where you said something to the effect of, and I don't want to misquote you, but that like lyrics, like you're obsessed with words, and that the written word is very important to you, and so lyrics often are the first thing that comes to you when you're writing.
Yeah.
But then you just also said that like melody is incredibly important, and so can you talk a little bit about how that comes together as you're writing? If words are paramount, but also melody is incredibly important.
Yeah, I suppose. So when I get asked, or I'm having a conversation about new music or even older music that I've maybe never heard, and I think about what endears me to that song or that band, it's what kind of initially grabs me. So, and I think what generally grabs me when I hear other songs that I start to really like is the melody. So maybe there's like a minor that's plugged in the right place, a minor 3 or something, or like perhaps like the hook has, or, you know, part of the chorus has like a scale rundown. I'm finding that there's a couple of songs that I really like that has this kind of same pattern where it falls down the scale, and that's part of the hook line. So I think what initially grabs me can be melody, and then when I really dig into the song and there's like you know, a line that really strikes a chord with me, or that I relate to, or that is like, oh man, I wish I had the balls to say that in a song myself. You know, I think that's where I kind of get into the weeds a little bit more when I'm listening to other songs. Now, if I'm writing, I personally feel that I am stronger with lyricism, and I'm always writing lyrics, like on a daily basis. I'm always jotting down notes in my phone or like on a piece of paper about something I read or something I heard. And so how could I twist that around into a song? How could I pull that into a song? Or I have a thought, like, let me write that down. And then I kind of build from there. So I'm always kind of constantly writing. And when I go to sit down to actually work on music and work on songs, I'm working from a lyric space, from a word space generally. I very rarely like come up with melody without words. And I feel so envious of people that are really good at, like, you know, sitting down to their piano or humming out a melody, because that just does not come as easily to me.
I can relate to that. You know, I write just for fun. I write songs for fun and play open mics and that kind of thing. And it's always lyrics for me. Like, it does not come naturally to me that I just hear a melody. Rarely. Sometimes it does. But I think that's really interesting, though. And I wonder how many people, because I think sometimes, most of the time when I talk to songwriters, it's melody first and then lyrics, right? But what's interesting is, like, I think those people, a lot of them are envious of, like, how it comes to you, and you are envious of how it comes to them, right? Yeah. Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, me too. It's yeah, I wish I could just pull a melody out of thin air, but I am such a victim of, and I know I'm certainly not the only one, of being like, oh my God, this sounds exactly like that Eagle song I heard 2 days ago on the radio that, you know, I hadn't heard in 4 months, and now I can't get that like earwig out of my head. And now I've just written this whole song, and it's the exact copy of that. You know, I always, when I'm playing like demos and stuff, particularly for my boyfriend or other, you know, band members or something, I'm like waiting to look at their face like, oh my God, they know exactly what song I ripped this from, you know, because I think that's what happens to me lyrically or melodically, is I'll hear, like, you know, like I've been trying to rip off this Nick Lowe song for 8 months and I haven't done it successfully. And I think that's what happens. I'm like, I want to write a song like this that sounds like this or has this feel. And then I start to do it, and then I just get so in my head of like, oh my gosh, everyone's gonna know I'm a fraud and I totally stole this song. But usually the verdict is like, no, it doesn't sound like that at all, which is good. But it's certainly a complex that I have. But, you know, with words, I just love to, they're so malleable, you know, and I just love that the word, you know, the words and but, like switching those around can change the whole meaning of, you know, a stanza. And I think that is a very small example of, you know, how to work words. And that, I think, is, it continues to be really fascinating and a challenge that I both love and hate about songwriting. And
how much of that kind of editing do you engage in when you're writing a song? Like, you said you're writing all the time. So like, when you sit down to write a song, or if a song comes to you and it's happening, how much of that playing with the words do you engage in on a regular basis?
Man, probably too much in the beginning. I think I would do better to have more of a structure of letting the song flow. If I'm in that kind of a writing space, the song or the muse flow, and then coming back and editing. But I tend to get hung up with like, oh man, this is a really good start on the first verse and half of a chorus or a refrain line. And then I'll start to kind of just obsessively go back to the first verse and the chorus and edit it or try to rework it. And then I've kind of lost the momentum of what the story is going to be in the song, and or like finishing the rest of the song. So I have not so many, but I have quite a few songs that are half written due to this, you know, like I got so hung up in kind of editing and trying to make perfect whatever, you know, that is the first part of the song or whatever part that I was working on, that I forget I don't get past it, so I kind of don't really finish the song, and that's to my own detriment. But sometimes what happens then is I'll take those pieces of songs and pull them out into another song, and that was always what was meant to be the final product. So I suppose you can't be mad at any creative process that ends up in a good piece, a finished piece.
Right. And I love that. I love every bit of that. Because I think, sometimes like it sounds like you are comfortable in the process. It sounds like you feel okay in the process rather than expecting all the time to come to like an end result necessarily. Like, is that true? Are you comfortable with, hey, I've done all this work, this thing isn't going anywhere right now? Are you able to put that aside and just trust that, like, okay, first of all, I've done the process, but also this may show up later?
Yeah. I mean, I'm clearly okay with not finishing something. And I think when I'm in the process and it's going, I'm kind of an emotional person, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but when I'm in the process and it's going well, I feel really excited about it. And I feel like, oh man, this really has good bones, and this has good potential. It's not a throwaway song. But if it's really, if I'm sitting down to write and I'm in the process and it's not coming well, it's not coming freely, and then I get kind of frustrated and a little bit fed up with myself and like trying to write, and then I kind of spiral down this like, well, you're a terrible writer, and what makes you think you can do this, and all that. So it's kind of a both in that regard. Yeah. That's
good to hear. It's good to hear that you go through that self-doubt, but you're also able to get through it. Because I think so often, and I guess that's true of most folks I talk to, but it's still in different ways, but it's still comforting, right? So when I hear a record like Southern Ambrosia, then how beautiful it is, then to talk to you about how like you go through that doubt, it makes me feel like, okay, all right, we all go through it, and that's good.
Not only knowing that other artists go through that, but also that that I have written songs. I mean, sometimes what I'll do is I'll kind of play through my old songs just to kind of remind myself like, oh yeah, you can do this. Like, you know how to do that. I mean, right now I'm trying to write for my third record, and I've got about, depending on the day that you ask me, 3 to 5 songs that could go on the record. 3 definitely that will go. And then some days I like these other 2 that I think they're good enough for an album. And I'll kind of play back through those, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can write 4 to 5 more songs and complete another record before the end of my life or whenever, I could do that in my life. So kind of knowing both of those things is, helps to bring me out of that kind of show and fraud spiral,
Right. Yeah. I want to ask you kind of a bit of a heavy question. You mentioned visiting Florida earlier, and there's a line in Strong Blood that I read. You commented on the fact that it was inspired in some way by the Pulse tragedy.
Yeah.
And I'm in Orlando, and I remember that moment so dramatically, right? So my partner Chris used to hang out at Pulse, and we were woken in the middle of the night to all these notifications, and so I just I'm curious about your tie to Florida, and then also like specifically about that line and how it ended up in the song.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of ties to Florida. My dad's brother was in St. Petersburg, so we did visit that a handful of times growing up as a kid, and then we would go to the Panhandle sometimes in the summer to go to the beach, and then when I was in high school, we go to Panama City and Destin and all that. Mm-hmm. So other than that, I don't have like extensive hangout time in Florida. But yeah, that song, it was such a, anytime I hear that song back, I am surprised at how much it takes me, every time it takes me back to how I felt writing that record or writing that specific song. You know, it was the summertime. The house I was living in had only a window AC in it. And I was bartending, or I was serving, and I was would come home kind of late at night, and I was so intent on finishing the song. And I would come home and I'd crank up the AC unit, and that's actually the only song I've ever written on an electric guitar. And I would sit down with the electric guitar, I would sit on the amp with the guitar in front of the AC unit and just like try and figure this song out, just with the air blasting at me. It was like this, I would go to work and I'd come home late at night and I'd sit down and start working on that song. So anytime I hear it, I always remember that. And I remember when Pulse happened, I was working on the song, you know, a day or two later, and I got the line, you know, in the second verse, newsman on the radio today said it's worse than yesterday. There ain't no sweet relief. And that was just kind of the, you know, the disappointment that it continues. I mean, in that case, that mass shootings were continuing to happen, you know, and just the helplessness feeling of that. And, I mean, so that line is directly pulled from my feeling of this, like, I cannot believe this is still happening over and over and over again, you know, and just everyone's inability, everyone being the people in power, their inability to, quote, do anything about it, you know, other than thoughts and prayers, which do nothing, you know. I mean, so I think that's how I was feeling that day, and that song always kind of takes me back to that summer. It was a really sad summer. I was in the middle of kind of a breakup with my longtime partner at the time, and so it's just, I was trying to figure out, you know, recording my record, and I didn't have any money, and at the time still don't, but you know, just trying to figure out how I was going to afford to make this record, and so I love that song because it's very autobiographical, and I love the feel of it, but it's also got a little bit of a melancholiness to it, you know.
Is that common for you in general, when with the songs that you've written like that? You just described a very clear scene writing that. Is that normal for you when you go back and re-listen? Are you transported to the moments that you were writing these things, or is that particular one, sorry, my pup he hasn't had attention in 5 minutes, and so he's flipping out. Is that common for you, or is it just that particular song is full of such emotion, and you were going through such a heavy time personally?
It's not typical. I think my personal favorite songs of mine, especially ones that came in either a writing session or just over a handful of writing sessions that came kind of quickly in my writing process, because a lot of my songs, I guess I would say half to 2/3 of my songs are written over the time span, and they're that kind of editing process, and, you know, sit down, leave it alone, come back to it another day kind of thing. But songs like Strong Blood and Slow Kill, Jokes on Me, you know, some of those I can definitely remember the sparks of them, and that is special. And I think that's kind of the point of albums, right? And records. It's a record of your life at the time. I mean, it doesn't have to be specifically about your life, but it's a record of what's going on in your life at the time, or what you're thinking about, or what the art you're influenced by, or maybe what's going on in the political landscape, or, you know, current events that are happening around you. So I like that idea that it's kind of a record of that time. And I do really appreciate, and I think that those songs are special to me, the ones that do kind of transport me back to that, for sure.
I can relate to that so much. I mean, looking back on this year, for the podcast, it's been great. You know, it's been like, artists are just sitting at home with nothing to do. And so I've been really fortunate. And like, it's so silly to me that we didn't do Zoom interviews before, right? Like, it's like this is brand new technology, but
Right.
we were always doing phoners and they were clunky and it was weird.
Right.
And you couldn't see, like this is so, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, I feel like it's so much better. I can see your face and I can see whether you're into it or I'm boring you, or, I can like make adjustments based on body language and the kind of things that we should have been doing for years that we didn't. But I have all these documents now of this crazy ass year. Right? Like I've immortalized this crazy year because I've done one of these basically a week especially since March. And I was going back through and like kind of, I did like a tweet storm where I went through each episode from the year and just said like a few words about it and tweeted the link. And I just thought, man, I'm so lucky to have this, right? Like as crazy as this year's been, I'm so fortunate to have these documents. And when you listen to like the ones in March or April and how I felt about myself and the world and art and what have you, and then you listen to the most recent episodes, there's a difference. And it's so fascinating, right? Like how much things have changed.
I mean, just to even think that in April and May, we had this buffoon idea that we were going to be back to normal in October. It's kind of almost silly to me, Like, why do we even think that? But it's also just like, it feels like, and I know everybody feels this way. It feels like years ago that this thing started, it feels like October feels 2 years ago, I mean, crazy. It's really weird. Time is such an interesting, time is a construct.
Oh, for sure. And we've been hit in the face with that over the last few months, right? Like, and I was reflecting on that today. I like that the arbitrary year marker, because I do like to be able to look back and reflect, and not necessarily for nostalgia's sake, but I just like to have like an accounting of my life. And I kind of hyper do that. Right. So I try not to, be overly sort of like overly self-reflective, if that makes any sense, because otherwise that's the only thing I'll do. Right. And my anxiety will take over. So I like the year marker because it allows me to look back and go, okay, here's all these things that went well. Here's some things I need to do differently. And I've gotten to a place in my life where I like New Year's resolutions for that reason.
Yes,
right?
Same. It's funny with New Year's resolutions because once I realized that you don't have to like be ashamed of yourself for not fulfilling New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
Like, well, let me see all the wild things that I could dream up. And then if December comes around and I haven't done any of them, I don't have to feel guilty about it. I'm an adult.
That's great.
I was just thinking about this. One of my resolutions at the beginning of the year was to read a book a month. And I know that doesn't sound like very many, and I hope that among like reading all the articles and like long form articles and what have you, that I've done that in the past, but I've actually done that this year. And I think a large part of it due to, coronavirus, but so by the end of, in the next 2 weeks, I'll have done over 12 books this year. And,
awesome.
and I feel really proud of that because I know like all the, Fortune 500 CEOs or whatever, they're reading like a book a week, and that's like what it takes to be successful. And I do think that the best writers are well read for sure. So it's been something that I've been wanting to do. It's been a New Year's resolution the past few years. I'm actually going to do it this year. And, next year I'd like to try and maybe make that 24 books in a full year, so every 2 weeks. We'll
love that. So what art are you fired up about at the moment? Like, what are you it could be a book that you've read this year that really fired you up, or, I read your list of records on Lonesome Highway that you got into, and it matches up a lot with me too. Like that Jamie Wyatt record, Neon Cross you mentioned, is so good. And I lived in that record for a while. Yeah. But like, what art are you fired up about right now? Are you reading anything that's got you excited? Are you listening to anything that's got you excited?
At the beginning of the year, I read a couple books by George Saunders, and I still think about those stories. I read Lincoln in the Bardo and Civil War Land in Bad Decline, and I still think about the stories. And Civil War Land in Bad Decline is a novella and then a handful of short stories. And I still think a lot about those. Just his writing style is something I probably think about once or twice a week. Just how envious or not envious. I just am interested in that kind of writing style. And I think short stories in general. I read another book of short stories, what we talk about when we talk about love, a couple months back, I think in the spring. And so that just really got me on a kick of like, oh, now I want to be a short story writer. But songs
Word.
kind of in and of itself are a little bit short stories. So I read a memoir called Southern Discomfort by Tina Clark. She's a drummer, musician, and a producer. And I think she lives in Georgia now, but for a time she was in Nashville. But her memoir is about her growing up in a small town in southern Mississippi during the civil rights era. And so she talks about, figuring out that she was a lesbian, right about, 10 or 12 years old. And she talks about that. She talks about her relationships with, her nanny who was Black. And I don't know, it was a really interesting, her parents are, one of her parents is alcoholic, and it was just so beautifully written. So I really enjoyed that. Music, man, I just got into this Britt Taylor record. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's the gal out of Nashville, country singer out of Nashville. Really beautiful record. I think a guy named Dave Brainerd produced it. Dan Arbach's on it quite a bit. Just a really beautifully written, produced, recorded, sung record. So I've been listening to that a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to get into painting. I've been doing some watercolor, and I got some acrylics back there, and I do enjoy that. I get a little bit frustrated at how amateur I am at that. So trying to have some patience and some
Gotta
zen
let go. Yep.
with painting, because I know it's not something I've had a lot of practice in. So I've recently started to look at some Basquiat paintings and some Kondo paintings, and just really kind of the art world is such a huge world that I know nothing about, and I feel so timid to even just start in that world. But I really love beautiful paintings and art, and I'm just very curious as to how people are so good at that stuff.
Well, and I think also painting specifically is more subjective in my mind, and maybe it's just my own ignorance as well. But I feel like painting is more subjective than just about anything. Like you mentioned earlier, that idea of songs, and there's a quality to certain songs that is clear, it's immediately clear, whereas I don't think that's true with painting. I think it's so much in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. And whereas, the structure of a song, a really well-written song, is just immediately clear if it's great, right? Whereas painting, like you mentioned Basquiat, somebody could look at that and be like, that is garbage. And then somebody else looks at it and it's breathtaking, right? So whereas Blood on the Tracks is just good. There's not a whole lot of debate.
Right.
You never listen to a Jason Isbell record and goes
Right.
It's immediately clear. Whereas I think with painting,
I was bored at work a few days ago because it's super slow right now, and I was looking at a Wikipedia article of the most expensive paintings ever, by either live, artists who are alive or maybe who aren't. And anyway, I was just going back through, looking at the paintings, and I just a couple of them, I was like, people pay that much money I mean, that is a block of blue. That's all that is, a blue block. I mean, that's crazy. You know, it's anyway.
But for somebody, it is the most incredible thing I've ever seen.
I know. And that is a really intriguing thing to me about fine art. Is just like, first of all, like how difficult it feels. But then also, how subjective it is, how it can really move. One thing could really move someone and then not another. But, you know, I mean, I suppose there are a lot of artists like that, you know. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's art in general. Like, but again, I think that like tying it back to the idea of giving yourself grace around your painting or around any sort of visual art you're creating is that it is a lot more subjective, and certainly there are technical skills involved, and you can you know, you can hone those skills, but ultimately, like, you know, whatever moves you, and like doing that work, I love doing. My partner is an artist, and she does all kinds of stuff. Like she you know, she makes everything from woodworking to making candles to painting, and just it's manically creating, right? Those kinds of things. And I don't sketch much, I don't paint much, but anytime we sit down and just like have a bottle of wine and do some sketching or some painting or whatever, I'm always like, why don't I do this more? This is so good for the rest of my creative life. It forces me to think about the creative process in a different way than going back to my comfort zone, which is writing a short story or an article about a record or whatever. Like those are the things I know I can do. Whereas a watercolor is like a foreign language to me, right?
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Oh, I lost you. Uh-oh. Can you hear me? I'm missing this. Uh-oh. Kristina, I'm missing this.
All creative stuff. I mean, even when I find that I'm not like journaling,
hey, sorry, can you hear me okay? I missed like a minute of that.
Oh, okay.
After I said the thing about watercolor, like the sound just cut out.
Okay. It's really hard. Watercolor. Did you hear me say that?
Maybe.
Okay. I agree with you that watercolor is pretty difficult. Yeah. But I think what is all of that is spot on, in that using your creative brain in things that you maybe aren't necessarily good at, like painting, or any sort of like fine visual art, it's going to open up a new part of my brain that I don't necessarily use when I'm doing work or when I'm doing the creative thing that I know that I'm proven good at, which is playing music and writing songs and performing. So to do something that's so outside the comfort zone, I think it does kind of like tweak these, you know, neurons and fire off these synapses that are really healthy for your creative self, you know, winding back around to the one that you are good at. And I, you know, as much as I say that I don't really like the challenge or get frustrated with the challenge of new creative endeavors, I feel appreciative of that, because then I remember, oh yeah, there was a time when I couldn't play an F chord for the life of me. And it almost like, put me off of playing guitar forever. I mean, I remember I started playing guitar in 9th grade. I remember being like halfway through 9th grade and 14 years old, and like getting to the F chord, you know, I knew how to play a G, a C, a D, an A minor, E minor. And I'm like, man, I'm rolling. And then I get to the F and I'm like, what is this? Is the hardest thing I had to do. And like basically almost giving up on guitar because it was so hard for my left hand to do that. And now, you know, it's fun to remember, oh yeah, there was a time when I could barely, you know, transpose keys or whatever with music, or I didn't know how to use my voice in the way that's best suited for, you know, how I sing or whatever. So it is good to it's good to humble thyself, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that's great. Oh, good. I'm glad that I asked you to repeat all that. That's really wonderful and helpful. Did you, I'm going to let you go. You've been more than gracious with your time, and I'm so grateful. Have you ever, have you listened to, you mentioned Lincoln in the Bardo, which I obsessed over, I think last year I read it. Have you listened to Blitzen Trapper's Holy Smokes Future Jokes?
No.
Came out in like April, I think, of this year. But yeah, it's inspired, like a lot of the songs are inspired by Lincoln in the Bardo.
Really?
Yeah,
oh my God.
I think you're gonna dig it. Yeah, it's a weird record and it's really, really good. And there's some really beautiful moments in it, but it's pretty wild. It's a pretty wild record.
That'll be a new experience for me because I haven't really listened to Blitzen Trapper before. So, but one thing I was thinking about with Lincoln in the Bardo is, and I didn't even really realize this until I got more towards the end of the book, that it all, spoiler alert, it all takes place in one day. Mm-hmm. And it's just like art that does that, specifically like movies and books that do that. It's just like, I can't even, my brain is hard to wrap around that. Like, you wrote a whole book, takes place in one day. Like, that is insane to me. That's so cool. I don't know. That's just one element of that book that I just really enjoyed so much.
Well, and that speaks to what you were saying though about George Saunders and the way he tells stories. I mean, it's just such a fantastic, like everything, the details are so intense. Like you're transported to this world that it doesn't exist, right? But you live in it, and it feels so real when you're reading that book. And it just speaks to his genius with words.
Yeah, I think one thing particularly about Saunders, again, is, and other really great short story writers, is the way that they just drop you right into a world or a situation, and you kind of have to make up the backstory for it, and like who are these characters, and what do they look like, and what is their story, just with the tiny little details that he or she kind of sprinkles in. And I think honestly the best story songs also do that as well. They keep it vague enough, but they give you can really give you beautiful specifics. And I think Lucinda Williams is a great example of that. Someone that keeps it quite vague to where it's very relatable, but also these just really beautiful details that you're like, oh my God, of course I've seen like the blue behind the eyelids of my lover, while they're sleeping. I mean, it's just like things like that. It just, that's the best writing to me.
There's such a respect for the audience, it's endearing in that way that I feel respected when they allow me to fill in the holes,
Totally. It's special. It's yeah. Absolutely.
Kristina, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and just a big fan of the show. So it's fun to talk about the creative process as opposed to like, what are your major influences? I mean, that's all great and good too, and I love talking about that stuff too. But like, this is opened up a new part of my brain. So I can't imagine doing that kind of work. Much respect to the folks writing for the papers or whatever, but like, I just like to get down with people whose art I respect, and so this has been awesome, and I really appreciate your record. I'm excited to hear whatever new you have in store whenever that comes. You got the EP that's out now. It's beautiful. Also, mostly reworked your own songs, and then I want to say there's at least one cover on there. Yeah. No, there's no covers. It's just it's just one new single. Yeah.
New single. Okay. Yeah. So, but that it sounds great, and again, you're amazing, and I appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Y'all have great holidays, and talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Steady, hard, and strong.
Kristina Murray, y'all. Thank you so much, Kristina. What a delightful conversation. KristinaMurray.net for all things Kristina. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. The song you're hearing in this episode is Strong Blood from Kristina's album Southern Ambrosia, which again, I can't say enough about. Give her a follow on social media. Do the same for the Marinade. We're on Instagram and Twitter. We love interacting on those two channels. I've been having a blast over on Instagram. On my stories, I recovered my old CDs from the late 1990s and early 2000s, which would be my late teens and early 20s, from my parents' house over Christmas, and have been posting pictures of select albums for folks to weigh in on. It's super fun. Come join the party, y'all. Tell a friend about the show. Leave a rating on your podcast app. Hit that subscribe button. These are all free ways you can support the Marinade, and we really appreciate that. MarinadePodcast.com for all things the Marinade. If you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community, where for just a few bucks a month, you can gain access to exclusive updates about the show, the Marinade, our Patreon exclusive show, Jason's Journey, and so much more. Sometimes I release episodes early or the raw audio from episodes. I'm going to do something really special today, the day that I'm recording this, on our Patreon. I'm going to put up the video of my conversation with the almighty Will Johnson, one of my top 10 at least favorite songwriters ever, from Centromatic to South San Gabriel to Molina and Johnson to all of his solo records. Just can't say enough about Will and his songwriting. This conversation was such a thrill, and I am so excited to edit this episode and get it out into the world, but that's going to be a while from now, and I don't want my Patreon patrons to have to wait, so I'm going to go ahead and release the video. Plus, there's a couple moments that will translate to audio, but there's like some fun video things that happen, right? So it's not a typical interview where we're just kind of staring at screens, and I think it's... There's an aesthetic to Will, right? There's something like at once mysterious and approachable, if that makes any sense. And that comes through in the video in a way that probably doesn't come through in the audio. So for just $5 a month, you can get all of that stuff. We actually have tiers all the way down to $2 a month. And every little bit helps. So if we could just get $2 from everybody who listens to the show, we could do huge things. But that being said, I am not a salesman at all. I understand that money is tight, and all the time for a lot of folks, and especially right now. So please don't feel the obligation, but if you want to connect and you can on a deeper level, please go for that. Patreon.com/Marinade Podcast. It's super fun. It's really a community over there. But those free ways to support mean just as much as the financial support. And above all, just thank you so much for listening. All right, y'all, it's time for what I'm getting down on, the segment of the show where I talk about the art that is inspiring me at the moment. I've been reading a ton. I read Graham Greene's Dr. Fisher of Geneva, or The Bomb Party, which I absolutely adored. I found a copy at my friend Mary's establishment. It's a place here in Orlando, in my neighborhood, basically, in the Milk District, which is just down the street from where I live and where Chris and I have lived for several years. It's really cool. Mary's a poet, a writer, and she and her co-owner Matt Duke, who's an artist, visual artist, have curated this spot that sounds exactly like what a poet and a visual artist would create, right? So it's a local spot, all local beers. It's a bar ostensibly, but it really is like a community hub. And Mary had a used bookstore for a while. And so she has this shelf, this large bookshelf right in the middle of the bar, and you can just take whatever book you want. So the other day I went in there, had a beer outside. Again, I'm being safe. I go in, purchase the beer, go outside, sit outside. But as I was paying, I noticed this book on the shelf from Graham Greene, and I love Graham Greene. If you haven't read him, check him out. The Power and the Glory is a book I read years ago about a drunken priest along the Mexico-U.S. border. Great book. Fucking great book. I absolutely love it. This book is called Dr. Fisher of Geneva, or The Bomb Party. It was it just captivated me. I ended up, it's a pretty slim volume, but it just packs a huge punch in a small space. Graham Greene is a master. And the gist of this book is that this man of modest means falls in love with a wealthy Swiss man's daughter. And the wealthy man has these strange parties. And the story takes this really odd turn when the protagonist, who is married to the Swiss man's daughter, and who is the narrator of the story, goes to one of the parties. Just check it out, y'all. It's great. Dr. Fisher of Geneva, or The Bomb Party. I also finished our good friend Seth Walker's book, Your Van is on Fire. I love this book for a lot of reasons. I love Seth. I mean, he's just such a nice guy, such a great musician, such a wonderful creative, and so giving with his time and his energy. When he's been on the show, he's been on the show twice. If you have not heard those conversations, I highly recommend them. Some of the stories that he tells on the show are in the book. And it's fun because, like, he tells all these kind of amazing stories about his life, especially his life as a touring musician. But then he also will throw in, like, his poetry for a few pages. And then he'll throw in his painting, his beautiful paintings for a few pages. SethWalker.com to get Your Van is on Fire. Highly recommend it. Also, I'm gonna make it happen that Seth comes on the show to talk about the book too. So you'll hear more about that coming up soon. And check out Seth's music as well. Any chance I get to plug Seth, I want to. I just watched the film Delicatessen. It's a French film by the guy who made Amélie, another film that I highly recommend. Jean-Pierre Jeunet. He made Delicatessen with a guy named Marc Caro. It's so good, y'all. Of course, my partner Chris would turn me on to a French post-apocalyptic dark comedy. Go check it out. It's hilarious and disturbing and wonderful. A little bit closer to home, the short film Pusher by Andy Morrow, pusherfilm.com to watch that. It's about a pill dealer in Appalachia, small town Appalachia. It's heavy, but it's very worth your time. And Andy is just such a wonderful creative. Check out her music as well and follow her on social media. Music-wise, y'all, I've just been obsessed with Will Johnson and his whole catalog. There's so many records. Centromatic had so many records, and there's the South San Gabriel stuff, Will solo records, the projects he's been involved in. He co-produced Austin Lucas's Immortal Americans, one of our all-time favorite, like, the show's soundtrack, it feels like sometimes. The Marinade soundtrack is Immortal Americans, and Will played guitar on that as well. He's played drums with folks, like all kinds of folks. He's just an amazing guy. And so preparing for the episode, I was like, I always do my research, but with him, there's so much research to do. So I've just been lost in his music, and it's pretty much the only thing I've listened to is stuff involving Will Johnson, and it's been a delight. So that I don't have anything new to report music-wise because I've just been going back into his catalog. I have plugged his record El Capitan before. That came out in 2020, and then the vinyl was released in January in this month. It's just awesome. I mean, can't say enough about that record. It's one of my favorites in a long time. And then the one he released in 2019, Wire Mountain, was one of my favorites from that year as well. So Will Johnson, y'all, and look forward to that conversation coming very soon. Everybody, if you got the emotional capital at the moment, go out and create something. I love y'all. I appreciate you. Until next time, cheers, y'all.